Hi, everybody. I'm John Horn. Thanks for coming out. If you don't hear the answers to the questions you want, you could look at my podcast retake because Cate and Todd have been on. I'm going to bring out our great panel. First, actor Nina Haas. Actor and executive producer Cate Blanchett. Writer, director, producer Todd Field. While you are in here watching this fine film, the National Society of Film Critics named Tar its Best Picture. And that follows the same honor from the New York Film Critics Circle and the LA Film Critics. Only half a dozen movies have ever done that before, so yay for Tar. And Todd, I know awards are nice, or good reviews, and maybe so too box office receipts or download numbers. But when you consider whether or not a movie has succeeded in fulfilling your intentions or goals, not anybody else's, how do you measure that?
Well, I measure it by everybody else's. I mean, the movie's made for people to come and see, so you don't make it in a vacuum. And all of us, we're trying to make something that would allow many doors that anybody could choose to walk into and complete the film for themselves. So the film is unfinished until the audience arrives. So I don't, it's not like there's this moment where you say, oh, I'm satisfied, the film is over. I don't feel like I've finished the film, honestly. I mean, that was sort of the intent of the film.
For every film or for this film in particular?
Well, definitely for this film, yeah. I mean, this film is asking a lot of questions, and this film is a film about process, and it's a film about rehearsal. It's not a film about result. So the idea that we would have any kind of equational narrative where there's right answers or wrong answers would be completely antithetical to why we did this in the first place.
But I must say,
go ahead,
like, you were saying this is a conversation, right?
It is.
Which involves
Todd, you're wrong.
But it is. I think it is quite incredible that in the current landscape, when people are understandably nervous about putting challenging fare into the cinema, and it's a work that I'm so pleased that you all got to see it on the big screen because the ideas are big, that you actually got to make the film that you wanted to make. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I'm no doubt. I mean, they were crazy to let us make this film. I mean,
Were or still are?
oh, perhaps.
Okay.
It's unfinished.
So does that mean if you were to be out in the lobby incognito and hearing people debate or argue and having different takes on the film, that would be job well done?
Yeah, I mean, what we always talked about was as long as there's a lively conversation, and that conversation could be coming from very different angles, as long as someone's not indifferent to it,
right.
Then yes, then mission accomplished. If somebody, somebody could have a read on the film that you've never seen, or you may not, perhaps not even agree with, but that's fantastically exciting.
So same question for Cate and Nina about finishing a movie, what you take away from it. Obviously, you are probably happy, or maybe you're not with your acting. Maybe you're always wishing you could have done something different. But is that same sort of thing that Todd's talking about having people uncertain about certain parts of the story? Or is that not something you worry about?
Well, for me, I think I have to answer it in the same way as Todd, because it's still an ongoing process. I am still thinking about all these questions that are being asked in this film, because I'm not sure what my attitude is towards all of that, and that I'm being challenged by reading the script, working on it, and watching the film. I am still in it. Myself, I watched it now 3 times, and every time I get something else. out of it, and I find that pretty incredible, and that makes it an ongoing process for me as well. In as the one who does it and who watches it, and who lived through it in a way. So yeah.
And are you the same way, Todd? If actors have questions, are you going to answer them, or are you going to be vague and say, "What do you think?" and "What would your character do?" How does that conversation play out?
Well, I mean, when you're making a film together, I mean, the three of us are filmmakers first and foremost. So, like, the conversation is level. You'd be a fool to work with artists of this caliber and not beg them for their opinion. So that conversation evolves. I mean, you start a piece of you start a script alone, and the worst thing that would happen is that whatever you thought was what you made. That would be a disaster, And so when Cate and I first started talking, there were a lot of the conversations started very practical because there was such obvious amount of things that had to be done. Basically, Cate had to learn 25 years of musical knowledge and language and everything else in a year, and she
English.
did.
I had to learn how to speak English.
You speak English, yeah. That was a big thing for her, the English part. But when we were casting, after Cate, we talked about the first role we talked about was who was going to play Sharon Goodnow. We both said at the same time Nina Haas. And the next thing was Cate said, "Do you think she'd do it?" And I said, God, I hope she'd do it, because we had seen everything that Nina had done. We'd seen all of her work with Christian Petzold. Obviously she's an incredible stage actor. I had just seen her in this film, Ina Weisse, called The Audition. I don't know if any of you have seen that film. Have any of you guys seen it? I highly recommend it. Where she plays this, violin teacher that has PTSD, and she's just extraordinary. Anyway, whatever. So the first time I spoke to her, it was my hands were sweating, and I remember sitting in my kitchen and
It was creepy.
Yeah. I try to keep them below frame, but not too much, And she said, "Yeah, I'll do it, but there's one little thing here I think you might want to do differently," that's a very Nina Haas sort of gentle piece of telling you that maybe you should pay more attention to something. And that conversation expanded. Nina and Cate were in Budapest. They happened to be in Budapest working at the same time during the year period while we were waiting to make the film. So they had met, and that was really important. But the very first conversation that the three of us had blew open the script in a really good way, in an important way, which is getting down to the brass tacks, which is what is this thing? I forget about what these characters are. What is the thing? And the thing is an examination of power, and power is not a unidirectional phenomenon. It requires others. So how does power work? How do people benefit? What's the cost benefit of power? And all of that. But that really came out of the very first conversations that we had with Nina, and so that set the table. I mean, at that point, it was just like, there's an old saying, and I'll shut up. But I worked with this filmmaker a long time ago, and he said, when I'm writing a script, I always say, God, that writer is so smart, so wonderful. And then I'm directing the movie, and I go, who the fuck wrote that script? And then I'm editing. I'm saying that director was an idiot, And I think that's true for for anybody that makes a film. So I was very, very lucky because Nina and Cate saved me,
But no, we would often defend the writer against your direction.
I know you're really wrong-headed about that.
Because you were so wildly open with that, and I don't think that's always the you as a filmmaker in a way trumped you as a screenwriter. It was a conversational gambit. And Todd was really insistent. You sort of said in a sort of a slightly anxious way, we are going to need rehearsal. Because oftentimes, everyone's time poor, and you come in and you hit the ground running. But you knew that we all needed time to percolate all of the textures and subtexts and the history between the characters in order to make the thing breathe, so that we could dispense with lines, so that we could do something with a look. I mean, a look from Nina Hoss is like it's everything.
Yours isn't too bad.
No, it's no.
So
No, it's true. It's true, and because there's there's really only 4 points of view essentially in the film, but the main are really our only eyes and our ears and our heart in terms of us being able to witness Lydia Tarr is through this character played by Nina Hoss, and so the economy of what this character has to do, with just like that, and the specificity is so important, and
you know what the
Nina Hoss
interesting-
makes it look very easy,
But the thing is, that was the good thing, that I wasn't aware of that. It's not that it was a conscious thing. I was just, I have her to look at, and to watch and to see what she's doing with so that happens at the end when you see the film. I wasn't aware of it.
Well, you weren't aware of it, I think, when we were doing the stuff with the orchestra, because I remember we were doing like 95 camera setups in the first day, and
yeah, it was fast.
it was really fast, and I remember. we put a couple angles on Nina, and then we moved them out right away, and she said, "Can you come over here for a second? What were you doing? Because I don't know what you were doing." I said, "Don't." Perfect, we got it. And she's like, "No." But that's the thing, The thing is that you were always in it. You were completely in it. It wouldn't have mattered. It was totally irrelevant to let you know what was going on, because you were absolutely present. You were making decisions constantly.
Todd, I'm going to ask you about the conception of the story, because Lydia Tarr is a fictional character who lives and works in what we would very much recognize as the real world. This isn't a Marvel metaverse. This is where actions have consequences. And when you're writing this movie, some of the things that you have Lydia Tarr doing are things that real people are doing, not terribly dissimilar. And I'm curious how you would define the relationship between the character you're constructing and what you might have observed outside of this movie, and if there's a confluence, or are they separate things?
Specifically, what do you mean in terms of
people who? Let's talk specifically about people who are engaging in punitive measures against
people who
former
have power
lovers,
and wield it?
people who are wielding power in sexual relationships.
In
Let's
sexual
narrow it down.
relationships,
Or however you want to define it.
This is as old as time. It's been essentially a white patriarchal situation. People that have held the thunderbolt in Mount Olympus, but just like Lord of the Rings, whoever holds the ring, you
I've
become.
been in both those movies.
I know. That's why I cast you. But ultimately you become Gollum, if you hold power. So, this is I came up in the theater, and I came up in the film business, and you witness all sorts of things naturally. That's been going on from the beginning of time. Yeah.
But I do. It's interesting what you're saying, because I think that you weren't prescriptive about it, but you kept sort of talking about the rehearsal process in the movie. And it's not a film about conducting. It's even not really a film about an orchestra or the classical music world. But you wanted it to feel like a fly on the wall. And there are characters who, and I suppose Lydia Tarr in particular, who's very hidden from herself. I remember I was playing Blanche Dubois years ago, and I was talking to my husband about her drinking. And I said, she drinks a lot. And I said, she's obviously got an issue with alcohol. And he was saying about the different ways at different times of the day that an alcoholic might drink. And sometimes you can actually pour a drink in a way that you're not actually drinking. Do you know what I mean? And there's so many things that Lydia does where she's not even aware that she's doing it. And I think the tragic thing for me is that she comes to that painful realization that she's not, people perceive her differently to how she perceives herself. And I think that that's a very human thing. And you don't have to be in a position of authority to have had that experience where people confront you with something that you've said that you really didn't intend it that way, or you had no idea that what you just said had the impact on that person that it did, or you don't even perceive that you've done something that you need to apologize for. And I think that is very human and recognizable. I think, but that was embedded in the filmmaking, and in a way, I think that's what allows, hopefully, an audience to lean into the character's dilemma, to the story, is the way that Todd has shot. The way the camera sits in relation to Lydia and her actions.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really know what, I mean, that's, we know how she responds to this character who has become unsettled and ultimately commits suicide. But we don't know what occurred between them. And these are all consenting adults, right? There's some kind of transaction, as Sharon Goodnow says in the end, and this really came out of these conversations with Nina, which is these are transactional relationships straight up, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't work, and humans are imperfect, and you have this character who's sitting at the top of this large power structure, this bureaucracy, and much of her life is attenuated to maintaining that bureaucracy that has very little to do with the child she was, who used music as an escape hatch to get out of her situation. So she's a completion junkie. She just wants to get things done, She just wants to, and maybe sometimes the tempo in which she conducts her life to get things done is not the tempo of other people.
Todd's filmmaking is incredibly efficient. There's not a lot of time spent on backstory. And Nina, I'm wondering, when you are having conversations with Cate about your character's relationship, because what's happening in their life is not unlike what happens in a lot of people's relationships. And are you having conversations, I'm not talking about fidelity, but about how a relationship evolves, how you grow apart from each other and yourself? Are you having conversations about these characters' backstory, even if we don't see it in the film? And where did you end up finding common ground?
Well, we did talk a lot, the three of us also. We started talking about it a little bit in Budapest, but then during the rehearsals, we really talked a lot about when did they meet, why did they fall in love, what was it, what is the attraction, what is their passion, which is obviously the music. They're both very accomplished musicians and love doing what you see them doing in the film. And for a while during the pandemic, they didn't get to do what really brought them together, and what also maybe is an outlet sometimes. I always thought this very beautiful apartment is maybe also somewhat a little cage for Lydia. And
an auditory nightmare.
Yeah,
I mean,
also.
For someone with misophonia, yeah.
Yeah, so
and we should recognize your production designer, Marco Ritter.
Oh, yeah.
Great
Yeah.
design. Yep.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry to
And
interrupt.
just to augment what you're saying, Nina, that the wonderful thing, the way Todd rehearsed, is when we were talking about scenes, we went to the place that we were going to film them to discuss them. So I think I can speak for both of us. When we walked into that apartment, we went, okay, they live here? What does that say about them? And Todd did this brilliant thing with Marco, is there was this pivot point in the apartment, and they put this massively beautiful grand piano in the middle of it, that to me looks like a coffin. And I think that's something, you know, and that for people whose unifying force in their relationship has been music, it's tied every part of their emotional, physical, and psychological existence together. It's left them during the pandemic, of course, you know, and the pandemic's only tangentially referred to, and I think if you watch the film in 20 years' time, and I do think it'll stand the test of time because Todd's a master filmmaker, but it's not a big texture, but that this is a very silent house.
But that was really your idea. I mean, we walked in there and you said, there's something missing here. There should be a piano here. And I said, okay, well, let's get a Hamburg Steinway. It was like $250,000 piano. We had to get a crane to bring it in there.
I didn't get paid, so that was a bit
No, we had a deal with Steinway. But the idea that Cate had, and it was so brilliant, which she said, this is a house about with this power couple where they show off each other, where they present, where they entertain. And this piano has not been played because they haven't entertained. And so much so to where she's retreated into just playing a spinet in her office, right? Or to her original apartment that she had when she first moved to Berlin. But it's untouched, and it is like a coffin, and it was untouched. We never touched this thing the whole time we were shooting there. It was an extraordinary instrument, and nobody played it. You played it a little bit. Yeah.
Oh my God! And that's the other thing about Nina. She's an incredible pianist. So Nina would just sit there in between takes.
Play the piano.
No.
Todd, you talked about power. I want to talk about power in music, because even if Lydia is the conductor, let's not minimize the power of the concertmaster. To use a Formula One analogy, Lydia is Toto Wolff, the head of Mercedes Racing, but Sharon is Lewis Hamilton, who's driving the car. Because I think a lot of people don't understand that the concertmaster, I mean, the conductor's on the podium, but the concertmaster really is driving the car.
Well, especially in a German orchestra, because the German orchestra, of course, is a democratic body. So anything that's going to happen is voted upon. And the guest conductor, post-von Karajan era, is at the pleasure of the orchestra. They can be voted in, they can be dismissed, all of that. So this relationship is very complicated, because while Sharon sits there and is playing, you know, spending her currency in very silent ways, but in a very powerful way, because she has the most political agency within that governing body. Lydia is out in the spotlight, but Lydia is also in many ways more vulnerable, you know, and so they're the opposite sides of the coin. It takes two of them to keep this power in place, you know.
You've suggested,
No, but also Lydia sets the tone, and Lydia just does what she wants.
Right.
And Sharon has to kind of go, okay, that's what we're doing, okay. And then she has to make it happen. So that is also interesting. It's both. Sharon has a big power, I thought, but it's also, firstly, she's someone who needs attention from Lydia also, very much so. You see that in the first scene. And then it's something she wants that power from Lydia, and she also wants to watch her up there. And then, but Lydia does what she wants, and in a way, Sharon has to kind of go, oh, okay, how do I make this work? How, you know, to keep this working.
It's true, but you pointed out something I think was really important. You know, it's like that first scene between the two of them when she says, "Petra's coming home with bruises on her shins." You said she's sending her on a milk run. She knows she's going to take care of it. You know, she doesn't have to say much. She knows who she's with. She knows when she says, maybe you should think about it with Francesca. She knows what she's saying. So she's exercising her power with like a feather, right?
Todd, you talked about ambiguity and not having tidy answers for complex questions. And one of those questions is separating the artist from the art. Lydia Tarr, in discussing Mahler's Fifth, says to appreciate and understand the symphony, you have to understand his very complex marriage. But she's not interested in talking about Bach's personal life, because that's irrelevant. So are you setting up, even within Lydia Tarr, this whole dilemma of there's no easy answer, or you can have it both ways. What are we supposed to take away from that kind of debate about the artist and how you can or cannot separate them?
Well, I think you have to look at it in two different ways. I mean, there's one thing in real time. If we're sitting up here in real time in a contemporary situation and people are behaving badly, that's a completely valid conversation. I think it's quite another to talk about something that may have happened 1,000 years ago. I think it's hubris and to think that we might have any idea about what really happened and what the culture was and what the social mores and religiosity or anything else were taking place. But I mean, talking about trying to equate morality with art, I think is a gigantic mistake.
Mm-hmm. Do you all agree? Okay.
I mean, I can only speak personally. I never see my role to tell an audience what to think, let alone try to educate them. And I don't really warm to any work of art that tries to educate me. I think it can provoke you to find out more about a certain period. I had quite a shocking experience, actually, really early on in my film career, where I made a film about Queen Elizabeth with a then very big and important Bollywood director, Shekhar Kapoor, who, in the first days of shooting, gave me a book with all the pages uncut, saying the sayings of Queen Elizabeth I, saying, "I'm not interested in the history. That's your job." Wow. You know, and that when it came out, people were talking to me about somehow that it was historically accurate, where it was like, no, this is a Hollywood hybrid movie. And so that somehow that you would make a film set in any period to somehow be accurate about events. I mean, that's what biographies are for. That's what history is for. And we look at certain events, certainly, that happen with many indigenous cultures. You know, I'm reading an amazing book at the moment written by two extraordinary writers, one of who passed away, called The True History of Everything. And, you know, and it's flipping history on its head, and that history gets rewritten at various different points of contemporary history, and it depends which angle you look at it from as to what actually took place in those events. So I never think of cinema as an educative tool. It's a tool. It's provocative. It's entertaining. It's asking you to think and feel things outside your own experience, perhaps. And it's certainly not. I mean, I often bemoan how linear and literal cinema can often tend to be, when I think it is actually, if you think about Godard, it's such an potentially elastic medium.
I want to ask two last questions about department heads. I want to ask about Florian Hofmeister, your DP, and let's talk about the Juilliard scene, which is a great scene of acting, a great scene of writing, but also a sublime execution of cinematography. Can you talk a little bit about Florian's work?
Yes. So one of the mandates, before I'd always shot with Antonio Calvache, who I saw tonight for the first time in a long time. And one of the mandates that the studio gave me was I would be the only American, and I had to work with the German crew. So I started looking for someone. Now Florian, I don't know if any of you guys have seen The Terror, directed by Edward Berger, who has All Quiet on the Western Front out now. The first season of that they were in Budapest. We keep going back to Budapest, and they were on a stage there, and there was a ship. And they went through all kinds of atmospheric situations, heavy fog, clear skies, but the light on the faces was so true that he would never have been caught. It was exquisite. It's the hardest thing for a cinematographer to do. And when I saw that, I thought, I really want to talk to Florian, and we started a conversation. And you're pointing out the Juilliard scene. The Juilliard scene was something where we had the location very early on. Marco and I had looked at it months before I arrived in Berlin, and I knew that's where I wanted it to take place. It was a very problematic set. It was problematic acoustically. It was problematic in terms of there was nowhere to hide. and if you broke down that scene, there's approximately 36 camera setups. There's a raking tracking shot, there's an over, there's a two shot, a medium two shot, there's a wide, there's a detail shot on the leg, and all of those things would have been covered. And I just kept talking about the scene over and over and over while we were scouting, and then one day I just realized there's a reason that we're talking about it so much, which is the approach is wrong. That this is a point in the film where she is the master of time. And we've seen two very long scenes before this that have been basically like this, where she's sitting. It's the first time she moves. And it's the first time that we're really with her, that she has control over everything, over her score of physical actions, over how she conducts herself in that scene, the tactics she takes, when she keeps her powder dry, when she tries to be humorous, when she loses her temper, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was really important that we be firmly planted with her as the conductor of that scene. And I said to Florian, we have to do it as one. And he said, but you can't do it as one. And I said, no, we have to figure it out. He said, well, we can't do it with a steady cam. We can't do it with a crane. We can't do it with a super techno crane and paint it out or anything. We can't do it with wires. That won't work. It's too clunky. And I said, well, let's just leave it at that. Let's just know we're going to have to do it in one. But for now, let's pull over because Kate's going to be here in about 2 weeks, and I better tell her. So
here's the thing, is what Todd always says. Here's the thing.
So I pulled over the side of the road, and I said, Florian, just wait here. And I walked by, and there was on this highway, and I was like, Kate? She's like, yes. Is everything okay? Yeah, everything's fine. Listen, the Juilliard scene, we have to do it in one. And she didn't even hesitate. She said, oh, you can't do that. Because she's so practical. I said, why? She says, Max's knee. I have to see the knee. I said, well, we'll figure that out. She said, well, how are you going to figure it out? I said, just trust me. We'll figure it out. But I had no idea how we were going to do it. So essentially what happened was Barrett Meyer, our grip, our key grip, and Daniel Bishop, our operator, basically constructed a new piece of machinery. They got some speed rail. It took 4 grips to do this. And on a remote head, and Florian and I were back in an alleyway, and Florian, this is the other great thing about Florian. Florian, all these sets, Florian had to light 360, all of them, because the way that we, with the exception of, well, even in the concert hall, the way that we kind of worked is the first half hour of the day, we'd go in and we'd rehearse alone, and then we come in and bring the camera in and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. It's a 29 millimeter lens. It's 3 feet high, no tilt. It's right over there, because we don't do a lot of coverage, So in that scene, though, I mean, there was nowhere for Florian to hide at all, and so it was a very, very elaborate lighting setup that he had to do for that, at the very least. And then he had to coordinate his camera crew with these burly men in stocking feet and the sound guys behind them, and they had to dance with Kate. So we blocked it for a couple of days, and we did full rehearsals, and then we shot for 2 days. And the very first day, on the very first setup, we had it. And it was just, you just like, oh, I can't believe it. Like, it all fell in, and at the very last moment, right when Kate crosses out, as Stefan, the actor who plays Max, is coming up, just as she's coming out, there was a slip, and we went, oh no. Well, okay, that was easy. We'll do it again. But it wasn't easy. It didn't work that day, and it didn't work the next day until the very, very last take. So wow. It was a huge commitment for Florian and his crew. It was a huge commitment, obviously, for Kate and for everyone else involved in that scene. But it was the only way to do it.
Very quickly, I want to ask about your costume designer, Bina Dugler, and what her wardrobes meant to you as actors. There's the great last shot of the orchestra, notwithstanding, about your own wardrobe and what it meant to you and how you found character through her work.
Yes, I'd worked with Bina several times before, and I love working with her. And for me personally, I find, the character starts to, particularly a character who is going to move a lot in various different ways. It's an important kind of foundational building block to have a sense of who the character is, particularly one who has built an identity. and who is tragically concerned with legacy and her outward presentation. So, and then how there were very long screen days. So we then had to work out, well, how can we have her begin the day, but then all these events happen? How will the wardrobe then be deconstructed by the end of the day? So that was those conversations are practical, but through the practical conversation of working out what you're going to wear, you somehow move into the emotional and psychological state of the character, which I find the twinning of that kind of external visual sense of the character, marrying that with what's going on internally, a really foundational part of the process. I think I've discovered over the years, and doing that with Vina is, she's extraordinary.
Nina, do you want to add anything?
Well, only maybe I totally agree what Cate says, that what was new to me with Bina, and I think that was also something special for this film, as far as I understood her, that she was very much dancing with us. So we had a few pieces in the trailer. So, and every morning, if we started a scene, she was like, "But where is, in my case, Sharon now? What do you think she would pick now? What did So it was
a wardrobe.
Yeah, exactly. And that was beautiful, because we could kind of explore these characters. And she would have the right piece for the next scene ready, but it was something we could explore, and that was beautiful. It was really.
She's also, aside from her like incredible skill as a designer, and tiny things like this, taking this character that's completely constructed, and then just invisibly, just something's off. And something's off. So by the end, you don't get caught. The way she tracked everything was amazing. But also just, she's a proper filmmaker. I mean, she's worked with Pedro Almodovar in a couple of films. She's, she was nominated for Academy Award for her work on Mulan, and then contemporary costume design is completely underrated and very, very hard to do perfectly. And she, she's a filmmaker in her own right, and we would have a weekly dinner together, and she really had this kind of beautiful way of kind of invisibly going throughout all the departments and keeping everybody kind of focused on the same thing. And
she's a very cohesive, collaborative force.
Incredible, yeah.
Before we thank our filmmakers, I want to thank you guys for coming out to see a movie in person. Fun fact, 10 of the highest grossing films last year, all 10 were sequels. So if you want to see movies like Tar or Women Talking or She Said, go to a theater and see them, because who knows what will happen if people don't show up. Todd, Cate, Nina, thank you all for sharing your stories and your film with us.